Now, it's time to... We're slightly earlier than normal, but we're going to have a look at the newspapers for you this morning. For the Times, Sunday Times, is the headline, Labour's dirty tricks here to stay, according to a memo.
The Observer warned that hospitals are in a frantic bid to fill gaps left by the junior doctors' strike.
Mail on Sunday says King Charles is at odds with the church over his diverse coronation.
The Express also leads with the Royals and Prince George and William's father-son day out at the football. It was very cute, actually, very good pictures.
Sunday Telegraph says the Tories are at war with Scottish Labour after it called for tactical voting in the next election.
The Mirror leads on their exclusive interview with Olivia Pratt-Corbell's grieving mother.
And the Sun on Sunday says S-Club's Paul Catamol's final days. He's looking very positive, actually. And this is the last picture of him, as far as we know. Say, I'm going to smash it on tour. Because they were reforming, of course, and going on tour later this year.
Very, very sad. I think he was only 46 or something.
Yeah, 46,
no age
yeah.
at all, just desperately sad news. Right, time to go through the papers now, and joining us this morning is the Deputy Editor of Spite, Fraser Myers, and political commentator and playwright Emma Burnell. Good morning to you both.
Morning.
Great to have you with us. Fraser, let's start with you and that story in the Times that we touched upon. Labour will use ruthless tactics until the election, according to a memo.
Yes, so people might have seen the most controversial instance of this tactic, a sort of image doing the rounds on social media suggesting that Rishi Sunak doesn't want to see paedophiles locked up, which everyone can see is a pretty extraordinary claim, dubious to say the least. Now, that's triggered a lot of controversy, but this new memo suggests that this is the kind of thing that Labour is going to be hammering hard into the next election. Essentially not giving any quarter to the Tories, using the sort of lowest common denominator tactics, even if it means sort of spreading fake news. I guess the thinking behind it is that we're talking about it. We're talking about the Tories' record on crime. Whether that's defensible, I'm not so sure.
I hate the term fake news because it was invented by Donald Trump to attack actually what is not fake news, but it was actually. I hate to say it, this is fake news.
It's not fake news it is an extreme interpretation of the news, I would say.
No, but
it is not wrong to say that we have an appalling conviction rate in this country.
That's not what the posters say, though.
The posters are saying that Rishi Sunak doesn't care about it. Now,
I don't know. Hold on a minute. Let's clarify. The posters say, should child sex abusers face prison, Rishi Sunak doesn't. It's not saying he's responsible for what's going on in the criminal justice system. He's saying it says he personally doesn't think they should go to jail, and that is not true.
I don't know what's in Rishi Sunak's heart and mind. I do know what's in his political priorities. Do I think Rishi Sunak wouldn't lock up a paedophile if he was standing next to him? No, he probably would. But the point is that politically the Tories have not prioritised this. The justice system is falling apart. There's a massive backlog. We have a less than 1% conviction rate on rape. And I don't have a problem with Labour going after the Tories on that.
It's not about the conviction rate, actually, is it? It's about the sentencing.
Well, we have...
It's about this, and on that one, it's about sentencing on sexual crimes, of which in 2012 Keir Starmer was part of the sentencing.
This is where I think there is a slight wobble with the. I wrote a long piece on this yesterday, far too long for me to get into here. But I said I actually raised that point. I think there is a question of taking these numbers back to 2010. Now we're covering the whole of the Tory government's reign of error, but there is an issue that. At that point, for 3 of those years, Keir Starmer was the Director of Public Prosecutions and Rishi Sunak was not yet an MP. But Rishi Sunak has to be held accountable for what the Tory government hasn't done and, more importantly, not done.
Well, that's fair enough. That's the point we raised with Lucy Powell on Friday. But the point is, how do you get that across when actually all everyone's talking about is the fact is that you are playing... It's lies, basically, and it's gutter politics, isn't it?
It is low politics. I really struggled with this, and you can see that in the piece that I wrote yesterday. I don't like low politics. On the other hand, I really hate Labour losing. And frankly, we are not going to see the Tory party engaging in Socratic debate. We're going to see the same things happening on both sides. And I just don't think, I'm not a unilateralist when it comes to politics. You in the same way that you can't be a pacifist if somebody else is beating you up, you can't. You can be, but it's much harder. It's much harder to make the case for it. You can, I think, make the case that, this is where politics is, this is the media we're facing. The reason we're talking about this, the reason this has had cut through when dozens of other Labour ads that were less fiery didn't, is because they've gone to the extreme. Now, do I like it? No.
But what
it's
are we
not
talking
what
about?
I would do.
But we're talking about the Labour Party.
Yeah, but
using
what are the
gutter
public hearing? The
politics,
public
not
are hearing
talking about
the truth that we have a very low conviction rate on sexual crimes.
Well, they're not even talking. No, that's not fair, because although that's not inaccurate, that isn't what they're talking about. They're not talking about conviction rates. They're talking about sentencing.
Well, okay, we have poor sentencing and low conviction rates. Both of these things are true, and we are now talking about them. Labour has shifted the narrative onto an area where the Tories were traditionally strong and are currently very weak. And that's politics.
Are we talking about it? Or are we talking about the Twitter?
I think we're talking about the rights and wrongs of this particular advert. I mean, it's true. No one party has a monopoly on gutter tactics or on high-mindedness. Certainly not. But I think it's another sign of Keir Starmer's ruthlessness that he will do or say anything to be Prime Minister. And it's not just these kinds of attack adverts, it's also what opinion do you want him to have this week? He will have it. You don't like his principles one day, he'll have another the next. He's changed his mind on nationalisation, on the trans issue, on pretty much anything you can think of. There will be a clip of him contradicting himself maybe only a year ago or 6 months ago.
It's not a good look, Emma, is it?
I mean, I prefer that he's been on the journey on some of those issues. I prefer it less on others. It depends whether I agree with him, frankly. But I do agree that Keir Starmer is incredibly ruthless. I'm just not sure I think that's a bad thing in someone I want to be Prime Minister.
Okay, Emma, let's go to you now. This is in the Telegraph, sticking with the Labour Party, actually. This is Douglas Ross. He says Scots should vote Labour, so tactical voting, in order to boot SNP out.
Douglas Ross, the best secret weapon the Labour Party in Scotland... Well, no, actually, that's not true. The best secret weapon the Labour Party in Scotland has at the moment is either Peter Murrell or Humza Yousaf. But he's coming... He's really vying for a good third there. It's a quite extraordinary thing to have said. It's not that I don't think the Tories would be thinking this tactically, that they would want to maximise the unionist vote to weaken the SNP, because I think in some ways they would be thinking longer term that might help them to get seats in the future. It's just that politicians aren't supposed to say this stuff out loud.
No, it's very odd.
And it's extraordinary in the context where, if the SNP does do badly in the next general election and Labour picks up some seats, that gives them a much better chance of having a majority at the next election. There is a cost to the Tories of losing SNP seats to Labour. In many ways, they should want for purely tactical reasons, they should want the SNP to do well. It also comes off the back of this Peter Murrell story.
In the Sun on Sunday.
In the Sun on Sunday, where this is to do with the sort of £600,000 that were raised for independence campaigning that allegedly seems to have been used on general SNP stuff. There's a lot we can't say, of course, during the ongoing investigation. But it's interesting today that yesterday the police took away his motorhome from his mother's house. So this police investigation is really quite extensive. We saw them digging up the garden, and now they're looking into his motorhome, his 110 grand motorhome. This is really, really a bad look for the SNP, particularly the kind of SNP establishment, and for Humza Yousaf, because he was really backed by that establishment.
Well, he's the continuity candidate.
He was the continuity candidate, and would people have voted differently had they known what that establishment might have potentially been up to?
Yeah.
And the timing of it is significant as well. I mean, it's what did the police know and when?
Yeah.
And when did that arrest happen in that timeline? It's all very interesting in terms of that, but it's a challenging time for the SNP. Hamza Yusuf only 1 week into a job. I mean, I think it was day 8.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's having an absolute nightmare. He may be the Liz Truss of Scotland.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, on a wider note, on the Douglas Ross point, encouraging tactical voting is not something I would want, as the Conservative HQ in London, any Tory to be suggesting, because there are so many MPs throughout England, Wales and Scotland who are vulnerable to tactical voting, to anti-Tory tactical
Labour's
voting.
backed it before, though, hasn't it?
Well, I mean, Labour has never officially backed tactical voting. There are places they will put more or less resources in, and that's how they give a nudge to it.
Yeah.
But in Labour's constitution, they are constitutionally unallowed to back tactical voting. If you openly support any candidate who's not from the Labour Party, you will be kicked out, as Alistair Campbell found out to his chagrin. So there are ways of, as I say, subtly suggesting that you might want to do this. There are boots-in approaches, as Douglas Ross seems to have taken, that will cause a lot of concern for Tories in marginals, where there could, if the Labour vote goes, oh, hang on, we should be voting Lib Dem in this seat, say, oh, I don't know, Isha might be one that's particularly vulnerable to this kind of thing, or vice versa, where there are places where you could unseat a Tory if the other parties come together. This is something that does happen. Voters tend to make up their own minds. Usually it's not a good look for any party to say this is what you should do. No. Voters are too clever for that.
Yeah. And if you aspire to be part of the government, you should pretty much contest every seat available. That's the right thing to do.
You would think so. This is going to come back to bite him.
Yeah. Is he thinking long term with this? Is it, as Emma touched on, if you get SNP out, Labour's the enemy, and you can handle that?
Yeah, and I think obviously the beating back the independence cause is obviously a very important thing, and we've seen tactical voting for unionists before. People voting Labour, ordinary Tory voters voting Labour in Scotland. So in a sense, it's understandable for him to have this thought in his head. Yeah. It's absolutely mad of him to vocalise it as the leader of the Scottish Conservatives.
Let's have a look at the Observer, should we? And what is good? I mean, this is not a week you want to be in hospital, is it?
No, absolutely not. I mean, it seems that trusts are doing anything except actually pay the BMA guidelines for consultants to come in and cover while the junior doctors are on strike. There are stories of quite a lot of bullying, real pressure being put on people. Now, we obviously want to make sure that people are as safe as possible during the strikes, but I think there are ways of doing that do not involve causing further problems with the more senior consultants down the line. It just seems that these trusts have completely lost any ability to properly understand how HR, how management should work, and are just going in so heavy-handedly.
But they're in such a predicament. I mean, on the political front of this, at what point do the junior doctors, the BMA, I mean, they're sticking to their demands of a 35% pay rise at the moment. I mean, that's just not going to happen, is it?
I don't think they'll get 35%. I'd love them to get 35%. Obviously, I currently pay £14 an hour. £14 an hour for people who are saving our lives. And we all think
because to pay more taxes, Emma.
Yes, I'm always happy to pay taxes. I think it's reasonable. I mean, I don't earn very much. Sadly, you guys don't pay me nearly enough to come on here on Easter Sunday. But I will always pay my reasonable taxes, and that's the price we pay for a good society. But I think it's absolutely essential. When we think about junior doctors, you tend to think that's something you might be called for 1 or 2 years, but it's just not. That can be a decade or so of your career, and you're earning very, very little, comparatively internationally to other countries and their systems, and just compared to other sort of jobs that you might be doing in those years. We all think doctors are incredibly well paid because we see the sort of high-end cardiologist, consultant, 150,000, whatever, but that's not the reality for a lot of doctors.
People knew what they were, because what doesn't sit right with me on this, and I heard this from a consultant actually who was furious about it, was the whole 35%. We've not had a pay rise. We've lost, this is the amount of money we've lost as junior doctors since, I was going to what it was now, 2006, 2008, something like that. See, in 2008, they weren't junior doctors. They were in school.
No,
So they knew what they were going in for when they went into
Well,
it.
some of them were probably going through medical school at that point, because, as I say, being a junior doctor does last quite a long time. So it would be not unreasonable to have gone to medical school at that point thinking you would be earning more by this point. It is... we need to remember that these are the people we're trusting with our lives, with our operations, with things that really matter, with our family members, the care that we really, really value. Now, 35% is a high-end ask, but that's a negotiation. That's what negotiation's for. And unfortunately, the government are refusing to actually properly negotiate with them. And if they did that, if they put forward a decent offer that the junior doctors would consider, this could be over. Not doing that.
What's a decent offer?
That's not up to me. That's up to the BMA.
Well, no, but you can imagine the government could come in and say, with asking for 35, you could come in and say, well, what about 20%, which is a huge pay rise, and they're still going to say no.
I suspect if the government offered them 20%, would not be a strike next week. I'd be willing to put that on the table.
It's difficult though, because the NHS staff, including the nurses, I mean, that deal is what, 2%?
Yeah.
2%, and then something else this year as well. I mean, that's stark, the difference in what the nurses are settling for and what junior
But
doctors
the nurses went through their own negotiation. They were originally asking for 15, and they found a place to settle, which is, and let's be clear, this is not just about pay, it's also about conditions. And junior doctors work very long hours. You really don't want to get someone on the end of one of those shifts.
No.
Well,
So
no.
there is conditions issues as well. So all of this should be negotiated in the round.
But Fraser, what is true, and I think everyone can agree on, is this cannot continue. I mean, we're talking about 250,000 appointments this week that are going to be cancelled.
It's
Phoned at least.
It's extraordinary. I mean, the state of the NHS, even without the strikes, is pretty parlous. You'll be lucky to get an appointment with your GP, lucky to get an operation. So that obviously can't continue. And I think it is important to pay people properly in these jobs. And I get that junior doctor is a path to a bigger and better career. I was a bit annoyed by the sort of adverts you'd see in the paper saying, oh, we get paid the same as someone working in prep or something like that. It's not quite like that, is it? You do sort of move on.
Eventually, but
you do
after
move on to
quite a
another
long
salary.
time.
But at the same time, we are losing doctors to other countries, potentially to other fields, and we need a lot more doctors. We have far fewer doctors per head in this country than most other European countries, so it's something that does need to be looked at.
I mean, they turn the NHS into an internal market. It's then got to act like a market, and markets have to pay the going rate. And if these people are able to earn more elsewhere, that's what they're going to do.
Well, that's an understandable point. We're going to leave it there for now. Fraser Myers, Emma Burnell, thank you both very much.
Thank
We shall
you.
catch up with you a little bit later on.